working on my Robotanist puppet, Robot Botanist. The Robotanist is a robot that explores botanical subjects on other planets. This is 1/4-inch square aluminum rod. I've blacked out the end so that I can see my score lines easier, and I'll use these score lines as a guide to help shape this part. This is my mill press turned over on its side with a slit saw in the chuck, and I'm cutting off the top plate of this 2-part step block joint. I need 40 step block joints for the Robotanist puppet. These parts are 3 steps into a 20-step process. Do the math and you'll discover that making 40 step block joints takes a pretty long time. Here's the mill press turned back upright. I've got a mill bit in the chuck and I'm countersinking ball rests in each half of the 40 step block joints. I'll also turn this piece over and countersink the screw head on the other side of each part that has this step on it. Here you can see how the 302 stainless steel ball rests inside of the step block joint. Eighth-inch cobalt drill bit, center drill bit. The center drill bit is harder than the cobalt drill bit. Mount the 302 stainless steel ball into the metal lathe and start the hole with the center drill bit. Then finish the hole with the cobalt drill bit. You wouldn't want to try and go straight into the ball with the cobalt bit because the bit will just skip off the ball, scratch the ball, ruin the ball, and possibly break the bit. This is the depth gauge on the lathe chuck. It shows how deep you're going into the ball. You don't want to go all the way through the ball. Drill in about 3/4 of the way. And you can see metal shavings coming out of the hole that I'm drilling into the steel ball. Now I'll show you the hole that I just made. It's exactly 1/8 inch in diameter and will fit perfect on a 1/8 inch diameter steel rod, which will then become a bone in the Robotanist puppet armature. The next step is to braze the ball to the rod. Put some brazing flue on the end of the rod. Fill the hole in the ball with solder chips. Mount the rod in the vise. Fit the ball onto the rod nice and tight. When the ball heats up, it will expand, and then they tend to jump off of the rod. So it's good to hold the ball down on the rod while you're heating it up with a hammer. If you watch close, you'll see 2 orange bits of solder drop out from underneath the hammer. Here and there. And that means that the solder has liquefied and fused the ball to the rod. Here's a nearly complete step block joint. I still need to cut off the extra length of screw, put in a set screw, and drill and thread the rod hole in the back. You can see the screw head is countersunk, and you can see that these step block joints have 1 pivot point, so they're good for areas like elbows and knees. This, on the other hand, is a sandwich plate joint. The sandwich plate joint has 2 pivot points and is good for areas like the neck, middle of the body, and hips. This is an armature for one of the Abbazotto puppets, and the fingers are hinge joints. That's a 3rd type of joint. It's made in a completely different way. This is the body armature for the Robotanist puppet. The neck and leg mounts are fixed to a wooden base. The neck is mounted to a step block joint, and the Robotanist head is made of styrene and will have LED lights mounted inside that light up. The black thing on its back is a 9-volt battery, and that will power the light inside of the head. This is the finished oil-based clay sculpt of the Robotanist body. The armature is wrapped in foil to protect it from the clay. Next step, mold the clay body sculpt. The red clay is water-based. The water-based clay resists the white oil-based body sculpt. I use Legos to build my mold walls because they're easy to find and I can just clean them up and reuse them after I've finished each mold. Next, I'll mix up some UltraCal 30 stone mix. Here I'm pouring in the second of a 3-part mold. You have to vibrate the mold once the stone mix is poured inside to shake out any air bubbles that can cause the mold to crack when it's in the oven if you leave them after the mold is hardened. This is the underbelly of the Robotinist. That shiny stuff is Vaseline. I use it as a mold release. Now I've finished the mold. I'm removing the Legos and throwing them back into the bucket, removing the wood strip wall, and I'll open the mold very carefully with a hammer and chisel. Clean the clay out of the mold, remove the armature, take the clay and the foil off of the armature, strap the mold together and test the fit. And it fits perfect. Here's a good view of the finished body mold, clean and ready for foam latex. And the armature resting inside the mold. The foam latex will fill the negative space around the armature inside the mold cavity. Next step is to mix the foam latex. I use GM foam. I get it from Alcon Industries in Long Island City, Queens. It comes in 4 parts: foaming agent, curing agent, gelling agent, and foam latex. The ingredient that keeps foam latex liquid is ammonia. You mix the 4 parts together, mix air bubbles in and ammonia out. The air bubbles are what make the foam latex spongy. I'm wearing a respirator for the ammonia. Here you see the 3-part body mold is laid out and ready for the liquid foam latex. I'll start by pouring the liquid latex into the lower third of the mold, and then I push the body armature down into the liquid latex into its resting place on the mold. Now put the remaining foam latex into this foam injection gun. You have to work pretty fast with this stuff because it starts to set up pretty quick. You can see that I've poured foam latex into the 3 mold parts, but the coverage isn't great, which is why I need the foam latex injection gun. So here I am closing the mold, and I'll use 2 clamp straps to close the mold tight. Now inject the foam latex through a hole in the top of the mold. You can see the foam latex coming out of the mold seam. That's a good thing. It means that the foam is filling all of those hard to reach negative spaces inside of the mold cavity. Now the mold's ready to bake. 180 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 hours. And baking the mold will vulcanize the foam latex. You cannot bake foam latex in a home oven or in an oven that you use to bake food in. Baking foam latex in an oven makes the oven unsuitable for edible stuff. When you bake foam latex, it gives off a sweet chemical sulfur smell. So I have a dedicated oven in what I call my stink room at the back of the studio. It's vented out the window. Proper ventilation is very important with this stuff. So this is the foam latex Robotinist Body Positive. It came out perfect, no air pockets or anything. The 2 arms and 4 legs for this puppet each had their own mold and went through this same process. Once you demold a foam latex part, you have to trim off the flashing. Flashing comes from liquid foam seeping into the mold seam. So once you trim off the flashing, you then have to fill the seam. And I call my seam filler puppet spackle. And my puppet spackle is made of Cabicil and Pros-Aid. And then I finish the seam with fine coats of balloon rubber. And then you can't paint on a foam latex puppet with normal paint. You have to use a rubberized paint. So finally, here's a complete Robotnus puppet with light up head, and he's ready for a paint job.